And welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio, brought to you by HoosierProud.com. Tom Crean was fired 2 weeks ago, and the week that followed was filled with rampant and ridiculous speculation, countered by very little in the way of actual facts as to the nature of Indiana's search for its next coach. But then Saturday happened. Saturday, March 25th, 2017, a day that will hopefully be remembered for a long, long time as the beginning of the third great era of Indiana basketball. That was the day Archie Miller was announced as Indiana's head coach, with his impressive press conference to follow 48 hours later. A few days after that, Collin Hartman surprised Hoosier Nation quite pleasantly by announcing that he will be returning for his final season of eligibility. A handful of other key players have also affirmed their commitments to Indiana. So far, so good. A new era of Indiana basketball is upon us, and it couldn't have started out much better. And we're excited to react to this wild week of IU basketball news with you right here on Assembly Call Radio. I am your host, Jared Morris, here with Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips, my co-hosts on the Assembly Call IU postgame show, which you can listen to live immediately after every IU basketball game at assemblycall.com, and every Friday right here on Assembly Call Radio. And if you can't listen live, no worries. Just search for Assembly Call wherever you listen to podcasts: iTunes, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, TuneIn Radio, YouTube, SoundCloud, and more. Wherever you look for us, you will find us. All right, I will begin this week's show as I begin every post-game show and every episode of Assembly Call Radio, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment. And the banner moment for me is actually the moment from a couple of days ago, and I believe it was Crimson Corey that broke this news that Juwan Morgan is returning to school. There had been a few rumblings, that maybe Juwan was thinking about transferring a little bit closer to home, but he affirmed his commitment to Indiana. And obviously, while Collin Hartman's announcement is key, and really any of the announcements from these guys that they're coming back, keeping the gang together is key, to me, Juwan, with 2 years remaining, is really an essential bridge from Archie's transition years this year and next year into kind of the settling in years of the Archie Miller era, which really begin in years 3 and 4 and beyond. Because if Juwan can stay healthy, and that's always a key issue with him, he really should thrive in Archie Miller's system, similar to how guys like Dyshawn Pierre and Kendall Pollard did when Archie Miller was coaching at Dayton. They were both undersized players, who found success on both ends, even though they had to play power forward and even center. And Juwan, health willing, can do the same. And if Thomas Bryant does indeed decide to leave, and you're left with only Deron Davis down low, you're probably going to have to see some Juwan Morgan, playing down low, banging down low. He's obviously got the versatile skills, and I would really like to see. I'm really excited to see what he can do under Archie Miller. So that, to me, a huge announcement for the present and future of Indiana basketball. Alrighty, let me now introduce my esteemed co-host. To my left, we have the host of Bracketology.fm and one of the world's undisputed kings of bracketology, according to BracketMatrix.com. And while he's still president of the Robert Johnson Fan Club, back channel chatter does suggest that he's currently examining other options for the 2016 or 2017-18 season. He is Andy Bottoms. Andy, what was your Bottoms line from the last week in Indiana basketball?
Well, I've learned over the last week that I really just don't understand how to interpret emojis or anything that's going on with the current set of players. So as you speak of Robert Johnson, there was one that was like, "I'll never fold" or something like that came out with fingers crossed on it. I don't know what that means.
Hashtag pancakes. Hashtag pancakes.
You could take that to mean he'll be back, that he's not quitting, but just come out and say what you mean. And the OG, like pancakes earlier in the week. So this is clearly like the get off my lawn portion of the show already, just getting it out there. Like, you kids and your emojis, I don't understand you. But no, I think it's an exciting time. It's funny, we were talking as we started to get ready for this. Like, it feels like it's been a long time since Archie Miller got introduced as a coach. We actually haven't done a show since then, and so to kind of think back of all the other podcast chatter and things like that have been going on with it since then, it's kind of weird to think that we really haven't had a chance for the three of us to get together and talk about it. So it's an exciting time. He was a guy, as we initially started talking about potential replacements, that I was excited about at the beginning, and have continued to get more excited about the more you kind of hear him talk about about the program and where he sees things going. So certainly an exciting time. Good to get some positive news with some of the players coming back and starting to get at least a little bit of an ability to kind of take stock of where this team might might be going into next season, what they might look like, and I think that's exciting. The downside is that's quite a few months away as we get ready to just start baseball season, and we're already looking ahead to what basketball might be like. But certainly an exciting time. I think like everybody else, excited to move forward, and now that has taken a little bit more shape. I think the staff moves should probably start to fall into place here in the next week or so, and so that picture will start to get a little clearer as we move forward. But certainly excited to have Archie Miller, and excited to kind of talk about where things go from here.
And to my right, we have a man who leapt with joy and then burst into a series of mock discount double checks, ironically, into his mirror after Wisconsin was eliminated from the NCAA tournament on that last second shot. A columnist for thebiglead.com, and someone who has now fulfilled one of his most important life dreams, inspiring a parody Twitter account. He is Ryan Phillips. Ryan, what is your opening rant about the last week in IU basketball?
First of all, I really want to find out who is running that account and ask where their life is at right now. Like, what is taking you to that depth where you're mocking me of all people? Anyway, this is actually the first time I've spoken on a radio show or anything about the hiring. I did a little video for it for work at the Big Lead, but hadn't really talked about it publicly. And I unfortunately couldn't jump on when you guys did a quick video about it over the weekend. Archie Miller was built for this. I mean, if you look at we've talked about this off air, if you look at his background, everything he is and everything he's been for 38 years is essentially building to this moment and to getting the Indiana job. I mean, he was, the son of a legendary high school coach, grew up with the basketball in his hands. His older brother is a very wildly successful coach. I mean, coaching is in his blood. And I know that people say that and you hear that a lot about guys from coaching families, but this is legitimately what the family business is. He went to North Carolina State, was an undersized, scrappy point guard who could shoot the lights out and hit all his free throws. And I mean, this guy was built for Indiana basketball. I mean, if you look at his style, you look at his background. This is a guy who came up the way you see players in Indiana who become coaches come up. And so I think that this really is a perfect fit. Obviously, I publicly was hoping for someone like Billy Donovan, but I've always maintained that was a 10,000 to 1 shot. And then when you sort of dialed it back and looked at the realistic possibilities, I think we all agreed that Archie Miller was at the top of the list. I think we said that on air several times, that he and some other guys were in that group. And really, when you're an athletic director in a coaching search, you break things into tiers. And the top tier is always those pie in the sky. You don't expect them to take it, but you contact them, guys like a Brad Stevens, Billy Donovan, Jay Wright. I mean, you can throw in a bunch of names there. And you take a shot at those guys, you contact them, and then you move on to the reasonable ones, and you've got a group. And I think rarely is there a 1 through 5. I think that you sort of contact that group, and then you figure it out as you go. And I'm sure the search firm helped with that, just sort of, working out particulars and personalities and backgrounds and all that stuff. But I think Archie Miller, I mean, he's a 38-year-old who's got one of the biggest jobs in college basketball, certainly the biggest that's open this year. That says a lot about the guy, as does his winning percentage of 68.8% at a program at Dayton that it has a very rabid fan base, but it is not a program with a lot of resources. And the fact that he was able to consistently keep them a winner is a huge deal. And so anybody who has trepidation about this hire, as somebody who's observed college basketball for a long time, Archie Miller's a rare talent, and he's a guy who is gonna put in the work. And so I would be confident in this hire. And as you said, Jared, it might take a year of getting his players into his system and all that stuff, but this guy's going to get it done. And I think he's a big, great hire for Indiana. And he may not have the flash of some other guys, but he's who Indiana fans should have wanted.
He's no nonsense and all substance. And we're going to talk some more about Archie Miller and his first week as Indiana head coach on this edition of Assembly Call Radio. We'll also talk about the return of Collin Hartman and how next year's roster is shaping up as we start to get a little more clarity there. And then I also want to talk with you guys about the impact of Archie Miller on two guys in particular, Josh Newkirk and Juwan Morgan. Had a great question about that on the mailbag that I did Thursday morning, and I want to get your guys' thoughts on it as well. So all of that and more coming up on this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio. First, I do want to take a quick second and tell you all about our presenting sponsor for Assembly Call Radio, and that is Hoosier Proud. And if you consider yourself a Hoosier, and not just an IU Hoosier, but someone who is proud to have roots in the great state of Indiana, then you need to check out Hoosier Proud, where they offer a line of T-shirts and accessories that are unmatched for anyone who wants a unique, stylish way to display their pride in being a Hoosier. And right now, that line of unique and stylish T-shirts includes a really cool T-shirt that says Marchie Madness on it. We sent an email out to our list a couple of days ago and posted about it on our blog. But if you want a T-shirt to kind of commemorate the beginning of the Archie Miller era, highly recommend going to Hoosier Proud to get that. And I'll actually give you a special discount code for that. So usually we give you the discount code AC here on Assembly Call Radio, and you can get 15% off. But if you actually go, I think it should work for the next week. If you use the promo code AssemblyDeal, ASSEMBLYDEAL, you'll actually get 20% off. So go use that. You'll get 20% off on that Marchie Madness shirt. Again, just a great way to commemorate what hopefully is the first week in, like I said, the next great era of Indiana basketball. So again, check them out at HoosierProud.com. Use the promo code AssemblyDeal and get 20% off, not just the Marchie Madness shirt, but anything else that you want to get there at HoosierProud.com. Alrighty, well, this is Assembly Call Radio. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips discussing a wild week in Indiana basketball news. And guys, I mean, let me just, get your quick thoughts on this. I mean, we've had Archie Miller talk about playing tough, hard-nosed defense. We've had him talking about, scheduling tougher in the non-conference. We've had him talking about this inside-out recruiting the state. I mean, he's just been serving up red meat after red meat for the Indiana fan base. Pretty much all the things that we haven't been doing in the last few years that have frustrated Indiana fans, in addition to, not winning as much. He's basically putting a plan together to do all of those things. Andy, is he going to actually be able to do all of this stuff? Because he's painting this very idyllic picture of what Indiana basketball will be, and I sure hope it happens. Can it all actually happen?
Well, I mean, I think that's what you have to do. You gotta give the people what they want, right? No, I mean, I think some of that's going to take some time. Obviously, when you start talking about the defensive side of the ball, I think that's something that we should start to see pretty soon. I think he made it very clear to anybody coming back what he expects. I think, the track record that he's had over his last few years at Dayton certainly suggests that, defense is incredibly important to him. And so I think that part, you should start to see strides in that area pretty quickly. I think the recruiting one is a little bit tougher nut to crack, based on where they are right now. I think the plan is great, but, recruiting is a multi-year game, as you start thinking about, building those relationships with kids, which obviously, he's potentially behind. Obviously, he's watched a lot of these kids that will be coming up in the coming years. But I think that's something to me that will take a little bit of time. I think certainly with the resources and everything that he has at his disposal, that will help. But that's something that, of the things that you mentioned, I think takes a little bit of time. Scheduling, I think we'll start to see an uptick. Some of these agreements, are more than a year or two. I think we're contractually obligated to play Mississippi Valley State every year between now and the year 2025. So, just an homage to Jerry Rice, really, I think. And
Jeremiah April.
Oh yeah. What is he? Does he go there now?
No, the turnaround jumper. It happened against Mississippi Valley State. Oh. Don't forget the greatest moment of the Tom Crean era.
Oh, I couldn't possibly. I did not remember the opponent. Anyway, so now that you've thrown me off,
sorry to derail the show.
Yeah, that's okay. So anyway, I think some of those will be easier to see sooner than others, I guess is how I would leave that.
Ryan, of all those things, that he's talked about that have just really caught the attention of IU fans, which one do you think is going to be the most difficult, or the one that IU fans need to be the most patient with?
Well, I think I agree with Andy that I think recruiting is going to take a little bit of time, because a lot of these kids, you start recruiting them when they're freshmen, sophomores. But at the same time, I think that I've heard from several coaches in the state just over the last few days via text, and they love the guy. I mean, AAU coaches, high school coaches in Indiana love this guy, and they have for a long time. Now, the top-rated kids weren't going to go to Dayton, but you put him at Indiana, and you put him in a position where he can connect with those kids and be no nonsense, and not be a car salesman, and not be trying to sell them on ideas that don't exist, and try and pump them up, but actually be real with them. And coaches appreciate that. So I think that's going to be quicker than we think. I agree with Andy. I think the defense is going to come next year, because I think he's a guy who, if you don't play defense, you're sitting on the bench. I don't think there is any coddling with that. So I think both of those things could come quicker than people think. But again, anytime a coach in his first year, you got to be patient with him. You got to let him put his system in. And sometimes it takes time to get his players, or the kind of players that fit that system, in.
Okay, well, you mentioned next year, and you mentioned the potential defensive improvement next year. So let's talk about that. And let's talk about that coming up on the Assembly Call, what the roster is starting to shape up to be as we look toward next season. That's next. Stick with us here on Assembly Call Radio. Excellent. And hey, welcome, by the way, to everybody on YouTube. We decided to do it a little bit differently tonight for this simulcast, and just launch right into the first segment of Assembly Call Radio. But obviously, we recorded in 4 segments, and so it gives us a little bit of time in between segments to plan out our next segment, say hi to you. We really, really appreciate those of you who are here live. I do just want to say it's been amazing over this past week, recording the 3-point shots, recording the audio mailbag today, not just how many people are listening to the podcast, but how many people are actually showing up live to watch those recordings. It's really, really cool to see, and makes them really fun to do. So I just wanted to say thank you to you guys for that, for being here. It's really awesome. Okay, next segment. Let's kind of look at the roster and see. We got Collin's announcement, obviously.
I think that should be third segment. I think we should keep talking Archie. Personally, maybe get into what of his team has been. Get Andy talking about what his teams have been like.
Well, we've covered that though. That's the thing. The last few podcast episodes we've covered that. So I do want to try and get
show. Have we?
Well, but no, we haven't talked at all about Archie on the radio show.
That's what I'm thinking. I don't know.
The hard part is we're serving two masters with the radio show, because the majority of people listen on the podcast.
I understand, but I'm just thinking people are going to be tuning into this to listen to Archie talk, and maybe we can. Why don't we combine him and the roster?
Yeah,
in this one, instead of just talking straight.
Because what I want to talk about is, when you look at next year's roster, it actually. Depending on who comes back, it looks like a roster that could be pretty good defensively based on what they did last year, and then you combine that with how Archie coaches. So maybe that's how we'll frame it, is the guys that are coming back, how they fit into what he wants to do.
Okay.
Otherwise, are there any other Archie angles to cover besides who he might be looking at for his staff? But that's a lot of speculation.
Yeah, that's speculation. We're not.
The only compelling thing to me to talk about would be: are there any weaknesses that aren't being discussed? Like what's the thing that could make this not go as well as people think?
Well, I think the thing we should talk about is the fact that it's a step up for him. He's been beating up on Atlantic 10 competition. I don't think that's an issue, but it's certainly there, and we should probably address it.
All right, so then let's open with that, and then we'll jump into roster stuff.
Okay, that works. Okay. I just think
that's something new.
And I just think that getting away directly from Archie is a bad, because people are still talking about the hire and all the press he's doing and all that stuff. So I think it's we're jumping out of it pretty quick to go right into roster stuff. That's my thought, though.
Yeah, no, that's it. I just want to try and find a new angle to do it, and I think that is one.
Okay.
Okay.
Hey, Andy, could you talk about their schedules and stuff like that, and who they've played, and have they beaten good teams? Just generally. You don't have to get into specifics, I think.
Yeah, I could have Ken Pom pulled up and probably jog my memory from watching some of their bigger games. I know they've played tournaments the last couple preseasons and stuff like that.
Or even just how is the Atlantic 10? Is it a terrible conference, or is that good competition?
Yeah,
it's facing good competition.
I can do that. It's pretty top heavy, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right, so let's hop in and let's do it. Okay.
Because I want to say that I did hear some people talk about this is just Crean again, where he's jumping up a conference. So I think that's worth addressing. Sorry.
Okay, let's do it. All right, you guys ready?
Yep.
Okay. Oh, shit. All right. You are listening to the Assembly Call presented by HoosierProud.com. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips talking about a wild week in Indiana basketball. Archie Miller hired, Collin Hartman's back. All kinds of crazy stuff is going on. So Ryan brought up a good point as we were talking in between segments. We're going to talk about the roster stuff, talk about how the roster is shaping up for next year here in just a second. But there is an interesting angle, I think, to get to about Archie Miller before we move forward. I mean, look, everybody's been effusive in their praise all week long. We know all the reasons why this is expected to work, why it should work. You know, this wonderkind coach, 38 years old, he's been preparing for this for his entire life. Okay, but nothing is a given. So what is maybe a reason or two why this won't work? Like, what is maybe a weakness that we're not acknowledging here in the euphoria of the honeymoon phase? I think one that you could look at is, it is a step up in competition. I think that's the one that we all talked about, in between breaks. And Andy, I'd love for you to, to just address that. I mean, he's coming from the Atlantic 10. Obviously, now he's going to be coaching night in, night out in the Big Ten Conference, a step up in coaches, a step up in talent level. How big of a jump is that, and how concerned are you about his ability to adjust?
I mean, I do think it's a reasonably big jump. I mean, if you look, just kind of looking through, kind of Ken Palm ratings and things like that over the last, handful of years. So in 2014, there's actually 6 teams from the A10 that made the tournament, which, as you'll see in the last few years, has changed a decent amount. It was the 8th rated league. If you go to 2015, just 3 made it. It was the 7th rated league. In 2016, 3 made it. It was the 8th rated league. And then this past season, it was the 8th rated league, and three teams made it. So, it has been, in recent years, has been pretty top heavy, where, probably this year was the most extreme version of that, where you had 3 teams in the top 50 from a Pomeroy standpoint. And otherwise, the next best was somebody at 85. So you have, Rhode Island tends to be in the mix, kind of comes and goes. VCU, since they moved there a few years ago, has always been there. Davidson has ebbed and flowed. Richmond is a decent team. There's definitely some, bottom dwellers. You got your Fordhams and Duquesnes and folks like that who tend to be toward the bottom of the league. So it's, I think it is a step up. I don't know that it's a huge concern necessarily. I think we've seen him be able to adapt with different rosters and different challenges that, I tried to outline earlier this week in a post. And so I'm not overly worried about it, but it certainly would not argue with anybody who says it's a fairly large step up in night in, night out competition. I think, the top end teams there are probably the equivalent of a, maybe not top tier, but maybe second tier Big Ten team. And so you've seen some competition in that way. And the pressure certainly is a little bit different. Although I do think people underrate a little bit of, how into basketball, how big the Dayton program is within that area. They do have a really nice arena, as evidenced by the NCAA holding events there with some regularity, and really a passionate fan base. So obviously not on the scale of IU, but I do think that's something that maybe just because I live a little bit closer to it and have a different appreciation for, I think that's something that people have sometimes missed if they've talked about what that program is or is not. But, certainly not going to argue it's not a step up by any means.
And something else you can look at too is, okay, so you're playing a lot of games against lesser competition. Do you play down to your competition? And when you just look through, their season schedule, and some of the worst teams in conference they played, Massachusetts, they still beat them by 12. Duquesne, they win by 19. St. Louis, they win by 21. Duquesne, they beat by 47 or 37. So, I mean, they were still, for the most part, outside of their 2016 loss to LaSalle, which is pretty inexplicable. That would kind of be like, Indiana losing, I don't know, at home to Nebraska or something ridiculous like that. That probably wouldn't happen.
Yeah, when would that ever happen?
Super ridiculous.
Yeah,
for sure. Well, I think you have seen, though, like in the non-conference, that they've, played in some of these other exempt tournaments where, if you go back a few years, they played Gonzaga, Baylor, and Cal on consecutive days. I think it was 2 years ago. They played Notre Dame. No, they didn't play Notre Dame. They played Iowa, Monmouth in the year that they were really good, and Xavier. So I think they've done a good job of trying to augment that. Played some road games, at major conference teams, which there you kind of have to do. But I'd like to see some of that, come through to IU. But they certainly haven't been afraid to, to go on the road to like in Arkansas, Vanderbilt, Alabama. I think they did this year. So they haven't been afraid to do that. And I hope that's something they don't totally get away from, because it has, albeit in a more limited fashion, given some glimpse into what, his teams could do against better competition.
Yeah, I mean, in 2016, they actually played 7 top 100 teams in the non-conference, and they won 6 of those games, including 4 in a row when they beat Alabama, William and Mary, Iowa, and Monmouth all right in a row. So, I mean, they've shown that ability, and that's good. And that does give you, some kind of positive feeling in addition to what they've done, in the NCAA tournament, making an Elite 8 run. That gives you some positive feeling there. I mean, Ryan, any negative that you see here, anything that you're worried about, or that, could maybe make this go not as well as we expect?
No, I mean, of course, there's always trepidation and there's always things to worry about. I do think it's hard when you see people say, oh, he's never done it on a big stage before. Well, yeah, he's never had the opportunity to, consistently, and guys haven't done that until they got the opportunity to do that. So it's really hard to hold him up to that standard, because especially because you're looking at some of the other options, and some of the other options, the guys who are in major conferences, who I refuse to name, weren't necessarily tearing the world up in those other conferences as well. So you can go with a guy who's been mediocre at that level and hope that putting him in Indiana makes him better, or you can go with a guy who has essentially done everything he can at a smaller program and is shown the ability to move up. So I think it's the right move. I just think it's worth examining that fact, because there was some trepidation from people who were saying, well, yeah, he's won in the Atlantic 10. What is that? That has nothing to do with the Big Ten, but quite frankly, it's, until he gets the chance to prove it, he wasn't going to be able to do it. So this is his chance to step up and prove himself on a bigger level. And again, as I said in the opening, this guy's been waiting for this chance for 38 years to prove himself. I mean, his whole life has led to the chance to prove himself as a coach on the highest level. And he's not going to get here and just be comfortable. He knows what it takes to win, and he knows what it takes to be successful in a place like Indiana. This isn't going to scare him, and it's not going to surprise him at all.
It's not like he could have done anything more at Dayton to show that he was ready for this.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So you really have to nitpick to try and find anything like that. All right, well, you're listening to the Assembly Call, presented by HoosierProud.com. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips, breaking down this wild week in IU basketball news. And guys, let's turn our attention to the team that Archie Miller will have on the floor next year. Obviously there's a lot of guys whose statuses are up in the air. OG, Thomas, what are they going to do? James has said that he's going to test the NBA draft waters, but not hire an agent. Collin Hartman made the surprise announcement today that he's coming back. We've heard affirmatively either from or reports on Josh Newkirk, Deron Davis, Juwan Morgan, Freddie McSwain. As far as everybody else, I'm assuming, guys like Curtis Jones and Devontae Green, I'm assuming they're back if they don't say anything else. I think that's the safe assumption. And then obviously we wait to hear from the incoming freshman. Justin Smith hasn't said anything, so I'm assuming he's still coming. Al Durham and Clifton Moore still up in the air. That's a lot of guys that I just named, maybe 15 or 16. Well, then, if you add in Priller and McRoberts, it's 15 or 16 guys for 13 scholarships. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out if everybody decides they want to come back all of a sudden. I still am operating under the assumption that OG will go, that Thomas will go, but we'll have to see. We don't know. Andy, as you look at this, and how the roster is shaping up for next year, has there been any announcement that to you has been maybe more important than the others? And how is the lineup and the roster kind of starting to shape up from your eyes in terms of Indiana's ability to actually compete and win some games next year?
Well, I think when you go back to what we talked about earlier and start thinking about, defensively, how Archie Miller is going to want to play, like who really fits that mold really well. I think Juwan Morgan is a guy, as you mentioned, who fits into that. I think if Robert Johnson does come back, or depending on interpretation of emojis, whether he's back or not, I think he could be a guy who can really flourish in that system. I think Devontae Green could be fantastic as you start thinking about a smaller guard like a Scoochie Smith. Had a really good career at Dayton. I think we've already seen Devontae really want to, has talked about wanting to be known as an elite defender. So I think you're just looking for guys who are going to embrace that. And so I think The ones that we've heard that are going to come back, I think can do very well. Hartman, as we think back to a couple years ago, was a guy we always talked about from a defensive awareness standpoint and those kinds of things. So I think that's a positive. As we talked about at the end of the season, though, I think the one question, depending upon who leaves, becomes who's the go-to guy when you really need to get a bucket offensively. But that's something I think is going to be pretty hard to tell right now with, a number of the, kind of core offensive guys in flux at this point. But I think of the guys who have said they're coming back, I think obviously, Miller has talked about wanting to play, not only inside out from a recruiting standpoint, but really get the ball inside and play from the paint and out. I think Deron Davis is a guy who helps with that. And we all were very excited about what he could do. And if you think about a full offseason of conditioning and all those kinds of things with him, that's really exciting. So I think the guys who have said they're coming back, you can see them fitting well into the system. You can see them flourishing if they embrace the things that he's talked about. The question for me at this point just becomes who's the go-to scorer and those kinds of things. But I think with who we know is going to be back at this point, those questions are a little bit tough to answer.
Ryan, how important do you think the Collin Hartman decision is, when it comes to helping to create some stability for Archie Miller and just what he brings on the court?
Well, I think that what you get with Collin is just a guy who can solidify everything, that he can fill a number of different roles for you. He could even step in at shooting guard if you needed to in a pinch, but he's basically a front court player that can play any of those front court spots. Defensively, he gets people organized. He will certainly help him out. And I'll tell you what, a year on the bench as essentially another coach will make him better, because he'll have seen the game differently. And you'll notice a lot of times guys who are out with an injury wind up and come back and play better and have a more well-rounded game. He already had a well-rounded game. I think this will only make him better because it allows you to see the game differently than when you're playing and going in there. So I think it's enormous. I think obviously Deron Davis coming back, as Andy said, is huge because it gives you that anchor in the middle, especially if with a year of strength training and everything behind him. I think that if he can get a little quicker with his feet and all that, Devontae Green, Curtis Jones, this team is not going to lack talent if people come back. As far as, who's going to leave, who's going to stay, and the numbers, that stuff will work itself out. I am not worried about that at all. I do think that Justin Smith, not asking for, who apparently has not, the reports are saying he has not asked out of his letter of intent, which would mean that he's coming no matter what. I think he and Clifton Moore are could be big time recruits with really high upside who could help as soon as next year. Moore obviously has to get bigger, but Smith is a guy who can affect games next year. So I think that there's a really good base to build from. And then of course, Miller's got to start working on getting, his type of players in for the next wave.
Hey, Andy, let me ask you a cool question. Dayton, we know they operated a lot with smaller guys playing in front court positions. Has Archie ever really had a guy like Deron Davis who's, big like that and so good down low? How will that fit in, you think, to what he likes to do offensively?
Yeah, in recent years, I'm inclined to say no. Kendall Pollard is a guy they've played a little bit in the post who's more of a Juwan Morgan size guy. Even Steve McElvain, who passed away, was not a guy that they ran a lot of offense for. And some of the other big guys they've had on the roster have played a little bit more from the outside. So I'm inclined to say no, at least not within the last couple years, as I think back to teams that they've had. So it'll be interesting to see that. I think they've tried to do that a lot through the dribble, and you can get by to a certain extent. We talk about competition. You can get by a little bit with a 6'6" guy like Kendall Pollard who likes to play inside. You can kind of get by with that there in a way that you probably can't in the Big Ten. So it wasn't as big a deal. But McElvain in the last 3 years probably is about as close to that as you'll get. But he was a guy who didn't, you just talk about possessions used, didn't use, nearly as many as other guys on the team. But, I think also a guy, with the kind of post skills and footwork and things like that we came to love with Deron last year is also not a luxury that a lot of A-10 coaches usually have.
No, that is very true. All right, well, we will continue talking about how the roster looks, how guys will be impacted by Archie Miller's system, and the rest of the news from this week in IU basketball coming up on Assembly Call Radio. Stick with us. Excellent. By the way, that first segment was 16:05. let me add this up here real quick. The first segment was 16:05, and the second segment was 14:31. So we are at 30:36. So I want to talk about Newkirk and some of the guards real quick because I think it's kind of interesting. There's a couple of interesting stats that stand out, especially about a guy like Scoochie Smith and how often he got to the free throw line and how
best name in the tournament.
Yes, and his reduction in turnovers throughout his career, which obviously both of those things, if our guards could add that to what they're doing, would be huge. So I want to talk about that impact.
Newkirk apparently is coming back, right?
Yeah, he's back. His dad said he's back.
Yeah.
What other individual? One guy that we haven't talked about is Curtis Jones, who is a really interesting kind of X factor next year. And I don't know if there's a lot to say because we haven't really heard much from him.
I mean, I mentioned him just now, but because you clearly weren't listening.
I tune out when you're talking.
Of course, I understand. I mean, look, I would too. No, I think that it's kind of hard with some of these guys because we don't know. So if we waste 5 minutes talking on a guy and tomorrow he says, well, I'm going to transfer, it's kind of stupid. But
what other individual players? Because I want to talk Newkirk. I think he's a really important player next year. Because I think of all the guys, I think he could have the most growth under Miller.
We talked to Rojo already.
We talked Juwan Morgan. We just talked Duran.
Duran Davis. Maybe Devontae Green. Yeah,
Devontae's the other guy. Let's talk him. And even McSwain a little bit because he came on at the end of the year. How, Andy, is he at all like Pierre or Pollard or any of those other kind of undersized guys that Archie Miller has had success with, or is that not an apt comparison at all?
Pierre was more like wiry, like a wing player. I'd liken him more to like a I guess if you think about guys on the IU roster, I guess probably a Curtis Jones, just a little bit taller, but just like athletic and a little bit more of a slasher.
Yeah.
Pollard has been a little bit more of a guy who would play a bit in the post, but I mean, I kind of see
they do something more than 5 feet away from the hoop. I mean, Freddie can't shoot. He can't. I mean, he's great on the offensive glass, and he'll be good at harassing people on defense, but I mean, those guys could all do something away from the hoop, couldn't they?
Yeah, so maybe it's a bad comparison. So
I think they're more skilled, but I think McSwain fits into the. I think any of this is probably a good way to kind of the comment that Miller made about like what do you say, like take your role on the team and do it to the best. I don't know, whatever it was. I wrote like 6 paragraphs about it, but I can't remember what it said. But whatever he said about like taking your role. Oh shit, I'll look it up. But
wait, did that just go out on the radio?
No.
We're good.
Only YouTube. We get loose on YouTube.
Oh, so we're not on in
oh god, now Ryan's just gonna like curse like 15 times in a row.
No. This is not on in Jeffersonville. They're not doing this live. I don't know. Maybe they are. I don't think they are. I didn't communicate that with them.
Well, somebody's getting sued.
By the way, I'm gonna predict that Andy shifts his fan club allegiance to Devontae Green this year. And then I'm going to predict that Ryan's going to argue that he had Devontae Green first.
I did.
Lead to the first assembly call fight.
First? Are you kidding me? This will be like 5 months.
Yeah.
Meet me at the bike rack after school, Andy.
I am not going to change my allegiance so long as he's back. Now, if he's not back, I'll obviously continue to follow him as we did with Stan Robinson. But
rocket ship emoji.
Yeah.
Did you find the line yet?
I'm working on it.
All right.
I'm working on it.
All right. So I got
the post pulled up now.
We have like 19 and a half minutes. So let's try and keep. Is there any good thing to end on? Like any short thing to end on in particular?
I mean, we haven't. Well,
like what do we? I want to make sure we don't forget anything that's essential.
What was our? What did we talk about? What did you guys talk about on the last show? Because I wasn't on. It was gambling.
Oh well, thanks for listening to it.
I couldn't.
You mean the live show after the
podcast? Are you not? Are you not subscribed to?
I don't have. I'm subscribed, but the podcast app on my phone has like 4,000 updated. I haven't even looked at it.
Here we go.
I listen to the post game shows when I'm not on, but I forgot the radio show. I forgot to do that.
Well, the radio show last time was all.
Fair, I only listen when I'm not on to make sure that nothing bad is said about me. So I don't really listen.
I mean, it depresses me because I know you guys will say something bad about me, and I'm very self conscious. So yeah, I listen and then cry myself to sleep.
Exactly.
All right.
All right. Now, the only other thing, and it's funny, Jared. I don't know if you even like caught your email. Some guy sent us something through the contact thing about like talking a little bit about Crean.
I don't want to do that. This is the Archie show.
I'm annoyed. I don't want to get into it.
Okay.
I blogged about it and posted enough about it on Twitter. I just want everybody to move on, including him. I think the more that's said is bad for everybody. Let's all move on.
Well, I mean, here's my angle on it, and we can give this to the YouTube users. He's selling himself for his next job, so I understand him doing a media tour. I honestly had no problem with him showing up at the women's game to support somebody.
That was awesome.
Him and showing up around town and things like that. But he's going to do his media tour, and then that's going to be it. I mean, because he's selling himself for his next job. It's kind of football coaches do it too. When you're a high profile guy at a big job and you lose your job, you've got to sell yourself for your next one. That's why he's doing the NCAA coverage. And quite frankly, he was really good at that for the draft last year. So
he is good at that.
Yeah.
So I just wonder if you're an AD, do you look at it and say, so was anything your fault? Like, do you recognize why the things didn't go? Because I don't get a great recognition of that from listening.
Again, he's selling himself for the next job. You know what I mean?
We're probably too close to it.
Yeah. But. No, I mean, like across the country, other people probably get it. We're in the mix and we watched every game and so I agree with you to an extent, but at the same time, the guy's got a family. He's trying to get another job and whatever.
I know that. I mean, I'm going to be rooting for him wherever he goes. I
understand.
I also don't know that as you start to think about, I mean, any of the things that people have walked away with. So like taking the Dockage interview yesterday, everybody's like, oh, he's a great guy. Like, I don't think that was in question.
No,
we know he's a great guy.
Because people didn't think he was a good person and a stand-up guy and whatever else. So I mean, I'm with you. I just threw it out there. Jeez, come up with your own ideas then if you want to.
No, I agree with you.
No, I'm just kidding. But no, I brought that up just because I know it's something we haven't really.
Yeah, and I just think this is the Archie show, and we're looking into all that stuff. So maybe in a couple.
I prefer to lead by example. If we're going to complain about something being talked about too much, then we shouldn't talk about it. So I don't know.
Except for LeVar Ball. In that case, I'll talk about anything.
Just. I've lost the will to record after LeVar Ball being discussed. I got nothing else. All right. Are we ready to hop into this? So let's go.
So we've got what, 19-ish minutes left?
Minutes. I'll kick it off with Newkirk and get your guys' thoughts on Newkirk. Okay. Because I talked about him some on the mailbag, and I can sum that up pretty quickly. Ryan, I'll come to you for that first, and then Andy will get your thoughts after that.
Good. All right, that's fine.
Okay. Let me get some music playing. We'll be ready to go here. You're listening to the Assembly Call, presented by HoosierProud.com, where they offer a line of T-shirts and accessories that are unmatched for anyone who wants a unique, stylish way to display their pride in being a Hoosier, including the new Marchie Madness shirts. Use the promo code AssemblyDeal at HoosierProud.com to get 20% off. I'm Jared Morris, talking IU basketball with my co-hosts on the Assembly Call IU postgame show, Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips. And you can join us after every IU basketball game over at AssemblyCall.com and every Friday right here for Assembly Call Radio. Guys, there's a couple more individuals that I want to get to and talk about how, they in particular will be impacted by Archie Miller and his new system. And one guy that really jumps out to me that I think could experience the biggest leap is Josh Newkirk, who is a guy who was extremely inconsistent, quite volatile, especially when it came, to turnovers and things of that nature, his shooting. But when you look at what guards have done under Archie Miller, and take, Scoochie Smith, for example, Ryan, a guy whose name I know you love. This is a guy who, in his 4 years under Archie Miller, reduced his turnover rate every single year. I believe he increased his free throw rate every single year to the point where I think by the time he was a senior, his free throw rate was 50%, meaning that for every 2 field goal attempts he was taking, he was attempting 1 free throw. That is an absurd number. And to give you a comparison, Josh Newkirk's was only 24%. So even though he drove a lot, he was not very good at getting fouled. And that's one of the biggest differences between an Archie Miller team and a Tom Crean team is free throw rate, the ability to get to the line. And so when I look at a guy like Newkirk, if he can reduce his turnover rate from where it was last year, about 23%, down under 20. If he can get to the line 35, 36% of the time, he could really see an uptick in efficiency. And when you combine that with his physical abilities to defend and his occasional willingness to do so too, if he's in more of a system, I really feel like he's a guy who can flourish under Archie Miller in comparison to last year. Do you think there's some credence there?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to remember that when Newkirk finally felt comfortable and healthy, he started playing really well. I mean, at least from the effort standpoint. And a guy that has that much physical ability will eventually rise to his level. And so I think that it's going to be interesting to see how he's used by the new coaching staff. I think that part of his problems last year were pushing the ball too hard and maybe being a little too fast with the ball, and in sort of this relentless drive to be fast that the former coaching staff pushed. I think that Archie Miller will push that as well, but I think there's more of a structure in place to his offense, having watched a lot of tape on what he does over the last week or so. I think that there's a lot more structure. There's a lot more, okay, then you go here, then you go here, then you go here. And it's more set than sort of the free flowing, thing where guys don't really have an idea what they're supposed to do or where they're supposed to go. I think this is going to be a much better fit for what he wants to do. And if he can continue to work on his 3-point shot, clearly. But I agree that this is a guy who was on the rise at the end of the season and who is a veteran, who has a chance now with a new coaching staff to maybe establish himself as a leader. He's been here for 2 years, played for 1. This will be his 3rd year on campus. It's a chance for him to really grab the point guard spot by the horns and take over and really buy in and be a guy that Miller can count on. So I think that if he does everything this coaching staff asks him to do, there's a really good chance that he succeeds and continues to get better. And I think that you could double that for Robert Johnson as well. I mean, it's about buying in and recognizing the role and playing it to the best of your ability.
I mean, Andy, do you see that too? I mean, is that something that we could apply also to a guy like Devontae Green, who also struggled with turnovers, and who also, drove in, wasn't necessarily great at getting fouled, but certainly showed a willingness to go in there and bang amongst the trees?
Yeah, I think so. I think, as I mentioned before, defensively, I think he's a good candidate to really embrace what Miller has proven to be all about in recent years. And I think one of the things that, Scoochie Smith's an interesting example. The other thing that you look at from him is his 2-point percentage, how much that increased. And I mean, how many times last year did we talk about guys having trouble finishing at the rim? Now, I'm not here to tell you that, I watched every one of these, shots that he took and know that, they were all right at the rim. However, if you're getting fouled that much, there's a pretty good chance that you're being aggressive and going to the rim. So, I mean, you saw him, increase from, 42% on 2-pointers as a freshman to 53% as a senior, and, steady improvement every year for a guy who's just 6'2". You start to project that a little bit. And certainly, again, competition is part of that, but it's also, just being able to understand how better to, absorb the contact, finish at the rim. So I think he's another guy who could really embrace that defensive role. But we also saw flashes from him offensively. And one of the things is you kind of listen to a lot of these conversations, that they did on Crimson Cast with different guys who had covered the team was about, there always seemed to be this struggle to really make things simple enough for guys to understand what they needed to do. And those are potentially two guys who just got a little bit caught up in the complexity, as Ryan alluded to, of the system, and hopefully things get a little bit simpler for him with the new regime.
You're listening to the Assembly Call presented by HoosierProud.com. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips. Ryan, you had some thoughts on Devontae Green too, I believe.
Yeah, well, I mean, in the same way that Josh Newkirk can step up and really embrace the new role and embrace the new style and all that stuff. I think that Devontae is the same way. I think that he really needs to take command of the offense, and be in there every single day working on this. and really, push himself, because this is a chance to. I don't think Archie Miller cares what your recruiting ranking was. I don't think he cares what you did as a freshman. I don't think he cares, what people expected of you. And he certainly isn't going to be someone who's going to care who your brother is. I mean, he's been dealing with that his whole life. He's going to care about the effort you put in and what you can bring to the table. And I think that Devontae is a guy who can bring a lot to the table and who I think we all love. I mean, if everybody else leaves and the cornerstones you're building with are Devontae Green and Deron Davis, I'd be fine with that. It'd be a rough year next year. I mean, we know that's not the case. Guys are coming back. But if those were the two you were building with, that's a really nice foundation to start with. And you surround those guys with talented players and you wind up having a great roster. So I think that that building on those guys as the future of the team and potentially being obviously very important next year is great. Surround them with the other guys coming back, and maybe, Devontae's a bench player next year, but he's got to play and prepare like he's a starter.
Andy, what about Freddie? I mean, he's another guy who really came on. The thing with him is a lot of his value was offensive rebounds and getting putbacks. And we know that Dayton is not as committed to the offensive glass as Indiana was. They tend to try and get back more, and they're really good in transition D. But I would have to assume a guy like Freddie, if he's on the floor, he's probably crashing the offensive glass, I would think. So his value should stay really about where it was, right?
Yeah, I think, what sticks out to me about a guy like that was, one of the comments and the values that Miller talked about was, know your role in the team and take great pride in it. And I think that was one of the things that we saw toward the end of the year. I mean, McSwain was one of few guys who really had a clearly defined role, or at least came out and provided the same things, game in and game out. He really was a, high energy guy, offensively, skill wise, limited, but a guy who was really aggressive on the boards and really, created possessions for IU in that regard. So, strikes me as a guy who, if you start, carving out roles on this team, and that's really something that we want to do, then I think, he's a guy who could, again, kind of flourish with that. Your job is to go and do this. And I think that's something he, embraced last year and could continue to do as his skills develop a little bit in year two. But, I think there's certainly a role for him to have on the team.
And, Zach McRoberts probably the same way. He obviously didn't play as much as Freddie later in the year, but, we saw a couple of good games from Zach where he really made an impact. And he strikes me as a guy who, understand your role, take pride in it. He will certainly do that, and for a defensive-oriented team, an attention-to-detail type team, which is what we think Indiana will be more so under Archie Miller, I think he could, have a role coming off a bench too, providing some important depth for Indiana. All right, we're going to go. We talked kind of about some offense here in this segment. We want to talk a little bit more about defense, because we talked a lot about how Indiana should have more of a defensive identity under Archie Miller, but what exactly does that mean? You've probably heard that Archie Miller likes to play a packline defense. What exactly is that? We'll unpack that as we go into our last segment here on the Assembly Call. So stick with us, and we'll talk Archie Miller and his defense at Indiana coming up next. Stay here. Beautiful. 950 for that one.
I can talk packline defense. I know all about it.
Okay, excellent. So we have 9 minutes and 34 seconds left. So I need to start it at 8:58.
Okay. Let me know when you want me to wrap up packline, because I mean, look, I could talk 2 minutes on it, or I could do 6.
Well,
I'll do 2.
Well, keep it quick and ping pong something to Andy. I mean, you guys take this because you know it better than me. So
it's very simple. It's a very simple concept. It's just
radio is always better when it's interactive.
Yeah,
we love monologues a little bit too much on this show.
I know.
We all do it. We gotta after. Okay, I can figure that out. Okay, so do we need to prep anything for this, or we'll just jump right into it?
Let's jump right in. I know what I'm saying.
All righty, let's do it. Okay, uno momento. Let me get this up and start recording again.
Hey,
yes.
Sorry, I've been muted on many things. Hopefully I wasn't when I was talking.
I should probably check that real quick.
Yeah, why don't you do that?
Maybe I will.
I know I wasn't on Skype, but I guess if you have stuff turned down, you wouldn't have heard me otherwise. I don't know.
1 second. Let me listen. Okay, you're coming through on the last 2 segments, so I think we're good.
Okay.
All right.
Was there anything else that you wanted to hit once we get done with the packline stuff, depending on how long that takes?
We can just riff on defense after, or how refreshing it'll be to have a defensive identity. I mean, this is going to take us talking about packline is going to take most of the segment, I would think.
Well, and I mean, let's talk about the point that, like,
I could really break down this Georgia Tech TCU NIT final that's wrapping up now. That's exciting.
No.
Hey, at least we lost to the 30-point game final. Right?
I mean, I think we should talk about
they're getting absolutely murdered in this game.
I think we need to discuss the point that, like, when you look at the guys coming back, they all had really good individual defensive moments. Like, we were a crappy defensive team, but like individually, these guys should be able to play good defense.
That's what you should open with and say. And now we know that Archie Miller. You should open with that.
All right.
And then you should say, Archie Miller likes to run the packline defense. What is that? And I'll just dive in.
Okay.
Dick Bennett.
That works.
Asshole. Dick Bennett and Tony Bennett's teams are fucking unwatchable. Dick Bennett was unwatchable.
Boy, we really better make sure they're not running this.
Yeah, we're really getting loose here.
Yeah, we really better make sure they're not running this on the radio now.
I mean, he's not a Coach K guy that I really don't like, but God, so many summer days were wasted trying to learn the mover blocker offense. Oh my God.
Okay. All right, let's do this. All right, cool. I'm gonna start recording. You are listening to the Assembly Call, sponsored by HoosierProud.com. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips, wrapping up this latest edition of Assembly Call Radio. You know, as I think back to last year, and obviously Indiana was not a good defensive team at all. And I think one of the things that frustrated certainly me the most, and I think Indiana fans a lot, is you looked out there on the court and you saw guys who were capable individually of playing defense. I mean, you go down the list of guys who we're expecting to have back next year. Robert Johnson, Devontae Green, Deron Davis, Juwan Morgan, Freddie McSwain, Collin Hartman, on and on. Like, these guys are all, Josh Newkirk, have the ability to be good individual defenders. And yet, because of lack of attention to detail, lack of accountability, lack of a cohesive system, the defense just always seemed subpar and a step slow. And it was so frustrating. And I think that's the thing one of the things that has Indiana fans so excited is we expect to have more of a defensive identity under Archie Miller. And, from everything that we've been told, that is the packline defense. And we've heard a lot about that. Maybe some of you out there aren't quite as familiar with what the packline defense is. So let's spend a few minutes here and talk about that, because hopefully we're going to become intimately familiar with the packline and hopefully very appreciative of the packline defense moving forward as Indiana gets its new identity from it. So Ryan, explain to us what the packline defense is.
All right. So basically it's a man-to-man defense where you sag off of the man you're covering. And the point is to clog everything inside the three-point line and the lane. So basically the ball handler has the ball. Instead of everybody else being up on their man and pressuring their man and denying passes, they back off a little bit. And the idea is to encourage long jump shots instead of dribble drives. So what you want to do in a pack line is you sag off, and every time somebody will drive in the pack line, they're driving into another defender, not their defender, but somebody else who is there to help. And so it's really just a defense that sags off the other defenders, not the ball handler, but the other defenders, in an attempt to clog the lane and stop dribble penetration. And really, it was started by Dick Bennett. He really developed it at Washington State, a guy whose teams were utterly unwatchable, but at the same time, it was a good concept. And the point was to have a less athletic team be able to hang with more athletic teams because you clogged the lane and didn't let them have driving lanes.
So do you give up more open threes that way?
It's possible, but if you have longer defenders, if you have taller, longer guys defending and good athletes, then that won't be the case. As you've seen with Virginia, Tony Bennett, Dick Bennett's son, runs the same thing. And last year he had he's always had good defenses, but last year he had a taller, more athletic team than he usually had, and they gave up nothing. And teams didn't shoot very well against them. So there's the potential for that. But would you rather have a team shooting 23s in a game or driving right by you to the hoop? You obviously take the long jumper. Now, the three-pointer is
I think we saw both those things
we
work
did,
effectively
actually.
against IU last year.
And look, the driving and overhelping leads to open threes. So either way, you're getting beat with it. So basically, the point of the defense is to sag off and protect against dribble drives to the hoop and people just tearing right through you. And it's very effective when run well. Arizona, Archie's brother Sean does it at Arizona as well. So I think, it's going to be interesting because it's going to be very different than what we've had for the last couple of years. And not a whole lot of teams run it right now. I think that it's starting to become more in vogue because people have seen how Virginia's defense and how Arizona's defense plays. But the whole point is to stop dribble penetration, which is something that has been a huge issue for Indiana over the past 9 years. So we'll see how it works. It's definitely going to be a sea change.
So you mean I might be able to retire my tweet if you're just going to let him drive by you, which I save
be able to do that
once every game?
Ideally, because otherwise it's not a good sign. But I think two other things to kind of tack onto that. One would be, you heard a lot this year about closeouts being really important. So that's where that kind of like, do you give up a bunch of open threes? The closeout really becomes important there. But having guys with length, as Ryan described, helps to mitigate that a little bit. And the other thing is really
discipline on your closeouts.
That's also true. Yeah. And then the other is really trying to take away baseline drives and really force everybody back into the, kind of crowded middle of the court. And to a certain extent, you're just trying to be patient enough that the other team either takes a tough shot, makes a mistake, does something else. That's why you kind of see a lot of teams that play that their defensive possessions end up being a little bit longer because they're trying to, force the other team to take time. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to play slow on the offensive end, but it's kind of a patient, hope somebody screws up kind of thing, or force them into taking a longer shot that hopefully you can get out and contest.
I always thought packline teams didn't force a lot of turnovers, but Dayton's actually been in the top 50 in turnover rate 2 of the last 3 years.
Again,
defensive turnover rate.
If you have athletic, quick players, you'll get turnovers regardless, I think. Plus, you make other teams uncomfortable with the way you play because you're not playing the way everybody else does. Sort of like how Wisconsin's offense makes everybody uncomfortable. Not to mention Wisconsin every time we do one of these, but
you always do somehow.
The other result of a pack line is you usually are a much better defensive rebounding team because you are closer into the mix and there's more of you around the hoop, and also you foul less because you're not pressuring the perimeter as hard. So those are two things that Indiana. I mean, this was a great rebounding team this year. It was maybe the one good thing you could say about this team consistently is that they rebounded, but also fewer fouls. Because you're not up pressuring the ball as hard. Well, you'll pressure the ball, but you're not pressuring the guys off. You're not bumping cutters as much, and you're not, really all over defenders all over the floor.
So real quick, I mean, this is obviously a system that's going to require some getting used to. It's new. These guys showed last year, they at least didn't show great defensive instincts last year. So how long will it take for this team to adapt to this style and to really be effective at running it?
Well, I think they'll be fine with it quickly because the concept is really simple. Obviously, naturally, they'll want to jump out on their guy and be tight. But I think that it'll take a while for them to sort of get into the. I don't know if it'll be a season. It might be a month or so of games before they're playing it as second nature. But I guarantee you, starting to a week ago. Archie was preaching this and making them, giving them film to watch and all that stuff. So they're gonna be well schooled in it by the time the season starts. Obviously, it may not be natural for a while, but it certainly is different and it's certainly an adjustment. But at the same time, it's gonna help a lot for these guys to from the problems they had last year. This defense is aimed exactly at the problems they had last year.
I mean, Andy, we got about a minute left. Will Indiana fans know what to do with themselves if their team suddenly starts playing consistent, accountable defense?
No. How quick was that? No, I think. I think that's one of the things that you can get excited about is that there's a defined defensive system that the coach has had a proven track record of success with. So, I think you can easily look at it and say, hey, the Virginia teams do this, and they sometimes the knock on them was they can be boring to watch, but I would rather watch something that defensively might not be super flashy, but is effective in a way that we simply haven't seen very much lately. And so I'm willing to embrace anything that leads to winning, quite frankly.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, and hopefully the defense will. Real quick, Ryan, in our last 30 seconds, do you have anything else that you'd like to say about Dick Bennett? No. Good. He muted himself. That's exactly what you should do whenever Dick Bennett is the topic. Andy, any final thoughts here in our final 15 seconds?
No, looking forward to the staff getting assembled, and maybe that'll be something we can touch on next week. I think now that the Dayton job has been filled, some dominoes might start to fall from that perspective.
Absolutely. All righty. Well, that will do it for us on this week's episode of the Assembly Call. Make sure you join us at assemblycall.com most days now, because we're putting out content pretty much every day. So check us out at assemblycall.com. Subscribe to the podcast anywhere that you listen to podcasts. Our thanks to Hoosier Proud for sponsoring this episode. Go to HoosierProud.com. Use the promo code AssemblyDeal for 20% off. And thank you for listening. We'll be back to talk IU hoops again with you next week on Assembly Call Radio. Until then, keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim, and go Hoosiers. Nice. That was, let's see here, 9:32. I was 49 minutes and 58 seconds.
I was muted on Hangouts and not on Skype, so you might want to re-listen to that last part.
No, you didn't come through. I didn't hear anything.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't hear you.
You were good. I guess I should make sure that you came through on the recording then.
Probably a good idea.
You did.
Okay. Let me close Skype real quick because I got to start getting ready for it.
Okay. Excellent. Sweetness. So that's the Assembly Call Radio recording is over. I'm enjoying. Do you guys like doing this? Doing it this way on Thursday nights?
Yeah, I've never been able to get into the dang chat, so I don't see what people are saying during the show.
I never do either. I can't have too many things open and I get distracted.
I try to keep it up on my phone because otherwise my computer will die. I got to get a new computer that has more memory.
Yeah, on it. Imagine how I feel because I'm actually on the clock at work right now.
I've
got like 40 things open.
We appreciate your dedication. Anything else that we three of us haven't spent a whole lot of time talking about all this since it happened. I feel like there's so much to say. By the way, we've been getting a really good response on all the new podcasts we've been putting up and all the content. So
cool.
Yeah.
I mean, look, maybe we should save this for off air.
Ooh. Well. All right. There's a tease.
Sorry, folks. You can only see behind the curtain so far before we need to. That's a little tease. It's like putting a little leg out there and being like, nope.
All right. Well, let's wrap up. Thanks, everybody, for being here. I don't know if we'll do a new podcast tomorrow because obviously we'll have this one coming out. So I'll probably do that, but then be back next week. I think, Andy, you said you're going to keep try to do 1 3-point shot a week. I'm going to try and do that too, and maybe try and do a mailbag per week because I thought that audio mailbag went really well.
I agree. Yeah. I mean, I think in the short term, as staff and roster stuff gets sorted out, there'll still be some good stuff coming up for the next, however long. It'll get to be a little stagnant at some point, I'm sure. But yeah, for the short term, there's still plenty going on. So
yeah, go ahead. We'll talk off air.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And we will talk to you next Thursday night. Every Thursday right here, 9 o'clock Eastern time. We'll have the simulcast of Assembly Call Radio for you. So we hope you'll join us. Talk to you then.